just growing up in Maine, I have always just felt a really strong connection with the land, and I think that UMaine is just a really great place to study because it just feels like home. It's small enough that it has the tight-knit feel, but also large enough that I feel like really anyone can find their place here.
My name is Jamie Fogg. I'm from Dedham, Maine, and I'm a marine science major. In high school, I got involved in marine science through a program that allowed me to go out to Mount Desert Rock Island, which is a tiny barren rock, basically 20 nautical miles off the coast of Maine. And I did seal wound research out there, and I really just fell in love with marine mammals and studying them. Then after I did that research, I had the opportunity to present that to the Maine State Science Fair, which kind of led me to UMaine, really. And my teacher actually told me about this professor, Dr. Christina Kamen, who is doing health and genetics work on seals and marine mammals. And I was like, wait, I really want to work with her. She's really cool, and I could see myself doing this in the future. And I started working in her lab, I think, the second month of my freshman year. So a week before college started, I spent a week out on Hurricane Island with a group of, I think, 10 other undergraduate students. My sophomore year, I did a project on environmental DNA of gray seals, but specifically looking at how environmental DNA acts in a coastal environment. Recently this summer, I had the opportunity to go out again to Mount Desert Rock and spend almost a month out there, which is just really fantastic. And then this year I'm working with Dr. Paul Rawson, looking at polychaetes in oysters, which is definitely a switch up because I'm typically working with marine mammals, so it's really fun to do something different. I think a lot of my time definitely goes to studying. I'm kind of a bookworm. My favorite place to study in the library is definitely the third floor because my friends like to talk to me and I like to lock in. No talking on the third floor.
There's no talking on the third floor.
Guys, what's the vibe like? Happy and down to earth.
Yeah.
I've met a more humble group of people in my life.
I think UMaine's really special for that. I think that there's such a wide variety of people here too, which is really nice. We've all met hiking through backcountry squatters, and Madeline is actually the backcountry squatters president. So I think we all found our community kind of through clubs on campus. And yeah, we all really enjoy being outdoors, which has definitely brought us together. My favorite thing about the trail system is just how accessible they are. They're right off of campus, and there's so many beautiful trees out here, as you can see. When you first get to UMaine in August, it's still very summery, which we can utilize the river a lot. Also, Acadia is so close, so we hike a lot. And then as it gears towards September, the leaves start to change and it gets a little bit chillier. And I don't know, it's just kind of like, okay, we're ready to start locking in and doing school, which is nice. You get to experience the really cold winter, which is always fun to be bundled up and go play out in the snow with your friends like a child. It's always just sweet because I feel like we come together during the winter. UMaine is such a great place. You'll meet so many amazing people just like I did. We hope to see you around.
I want to be a super senior because I don't want to leave.
I know, wait. Oh my god, I can't hold this.